All right, folks, we're going to be looking at Chapter 12 now. Chapter 12 covers, kind of some interesting topics here. The main focus being on e-commerce and, business-related topics really related to web design, because this becomes a really big area of web design working with e-commerce systems. So one thing that, you just start right off the bat, you throw this word out there, e-commerce, and what the heck does it mean? Right. So the concept is basically this, that you are conducting business online in a nutshell. They have a couple things listed here, but they're saying the major functions of e-commerce are basically buying and selling things. So whether you're the one buying or the one selling, or you're doing some sort of financial transaction or interchange online, and that can take many different forms, by the way. So you could think of bank transfers or banking itself, for that matter. Or if you guys have ever used services like Venmo or PayPal or something like that, that's an aspect of this as well. Now, when businesses venture into e-commerce, they do this to basically increase their sales channels. So, real great case scenario on this is the same thing that happened to a lot of people when the pandemic kicked in. So for a lot of us, for example, right now we're on Zoom, right? And in IT, that was not abnormal. We would have Zoom classes before, the pandemic happened. And then the pandemic happened, and everybody else at school is like, oh my God, what do we do in the pandemic? We don't know how to use Zoom, right? And they have to figure it out quick, right? Same thing happened in the pandemic for businesses that up until this point had not had a web presence or a website, especially restaurants. And I think restaurants were most notably driven by this. All of a sudden it's like, well, nobody can come into the restaurant, or if they can come into the restaurant, they can just pick stuff up, and then they have to call us. Well, that's really inconvenient. Maybe we need a website where people can order the food and then just stop in and get the food, right? That type of thing. So very quickly, people tried to ramp up. What a lot of times people discover when they're running a business online is, so what is kind of like, why should I sell stuff online? Well, here's some of the main reasons, and I think this slide does a pretty good job of it, is often, if you're selling something and you have to put it in what we call a brick and mortar store, so like a physical store space, well, you have to go to find a place that you're either going to buy a building or rent out a retail spot. I don't know if you guys have ever shopped for commercial real estate, but it tends to be 2 to 3 times more expensive cost-wise than non-commercial real estate. So like if you rent a house in a neighborhood and then rent a business of the same size, the business is going to cost a lot more to rent. So selling stuff online has some reduced costs, because now you don't need to have the store that you're heating and cooling and lighting and plowing snow and etc., right? So there's reduced costs, but you're still selling the same stuff. Customers seem to like it better, so people do like to shop online. I assume both of you at some point have done some online shopping, right? And if you haven't actually bought the things online, you probably spent time looking online to figure out what you're going to buy or where the good deal exists. If you're shopping online, if you're doing your transactions online, you also have this kind of like breadcrumb trail of like what you did. So like if you buy things electronically, you have record of it. If you go to a website, you do a lot of business with them and you shop with them over and over again, they might have an order history. So for example, if you go to that same restaurant every time and order your Chinese food, for example, maybe they have a sign-in system, and you just sign in, you can pull up your past orders and just click reorder and be done, right? So kind of interesting thing. The other thing, and I saw this very interestingly on Friday evening, my wife and I went out to Madison to see a show, and we stopped at a place to get something to eat where we've stopped in the past. And as we were sitting there, and I was having, I think, the fish fry and French fries and stuff, I was like noticing how busy they were behind the counter. It's like most of the food they were making in that restaurant was for like Uber Eats and DoorDash and people coming in to pick it up directly. And it seemed like they were cooking more food for that than they were for the people in the restaurant. So yeah, you can increase your sales pretty dramatically by adding an online component. So, of course, businesses are going to do it. Why is it good for consumers? Well, it's easier. How many of you during the pandemic, maybe when you had never ordered anything online before, are all of a sudden ordering those things online? So for a lot of people, they were even doing their groceries that way, right? So instead of like taking the time to go to the grocery store because they're freaked out about the virus, they would just order their stuff online and then pick it up, or even take it a step further and have it delivered. And those are all feasible pathways for doing things. And the truth is, if you walk into a store, and I look at this last bullet here, like if you walk into Best Buy, for example, and you look at, like, let's say the laptops or all the little doodads that they might have a great selection, but it might not be the entire selection of what they have. In fact, the weirder, odder, like things that you shop for, sometimes you can only find online. There's no other way to find them, because people just don't carry them in stores. So more selection of stuff, absolutely. Why is it maybe potentially risky for a business? Well, for a business, if they're going and venturing into selling things online, you do have to have a good website. So you can't have a website that's not working well, that isn't secure, that type of thing. And so you have to make sure that you have a quality website. And unfortunately, folks, that kind of website can cost businesses money, so that's a risk. There are some people that are very reluctant, real frankly, to buy things online, for whatever reason. Maybe you're one of those. Like maybe, for example, you're okay ordering some computer parts online and having them shipped. Not a big deal, right? You look up the specs, the price is good, the shipping's okay, you put it in your cart, check out, and a couple days later it shows up. Or if you get it from Amazon, maybe they'll bring it the same day, right? But would you do the same thing with a car or a house? Right? And this is kind of a weird thing to say, but for example, I'm one of these people that has purchased cars online sight unseen, based on like, a posting or whatever. I know it sounds pretty strange, but I've had actually pretty decent success with it and got really decent prices. So I was looking for, like, at one point, a very specific type of car that was really hard to find here in Wisconsin, but I found one in Florida at a really good price. So I bought it and then flew down and drove it back, right? Sight unseen. And it worked out great. And, and I was very happy with it. Still have that car today. But you can understand why somebody might not be willing, for example, because we're talking a car here, we're not talking like a $50-$100, we're talking thousands of dollars. Are you willing to do that? And some people will just say no. Or for example, if you're ordering like hot restaurant food, is that something you want to order online and then wait till it's delivered and maybe it's cold? Or do you want to go pick it up? Or do you not even want to do that because you hate food packaged in plastic, for example? These are all kinds of things that you think about. The other thing that happens when selling online for businesses, and they often don't think about this, is you now, instead of just competing with the people in your area, you are competing with the entire internet. That's a pretty big marketplace to compete with. So something to think about. If you're a consumer, what are the risks? Well, one thing is, who are you dealing with on the other end? What business are you dealing with? If it's a business that you know and you've patronized in the past and you know how they operate, you might have some faith in them. But how are you to know that, like, if you provide your personal information and credit card number to a company, that they're not going to just start like hitting charges on your credit card? Well, it's a matter of faith, right? But you do take that risk anytime you shop online that might happen. And for all I know, that may have happened to some of you. Now, that can actually also happen in physical situations too, where your information can be compromised. And when you're looking at products, do you trust what's being described? And are the photos really good enough so that you know what you're getting? Well, perhaps, there is that part of it. And then what happens if you need to return it? It's not good. How do you do that? How does the company handle that? Because anytime you're returning something and if it's being shipped, well, now you're paying money in both directions, And if you buy like a $10 doodad, but the shipping's $10 each way, well, now you're spending, way more than it's worth. And is it worth it? Okay, all relatively good points. So a lot of this really comes down to like what makes sense to do for particular things. I think that most of you that have tried, e-commerce, like you get comfort levels working with certain organizations. And for example, for a lot of us, like Amazon is like the go-to for online shopping. Why? Because they've been doing it for so long, and they have really good customer service, right? It's not always so good for the vendors, though, by the way. All right, when we do e-commerce, we tend to think of e-commerce in the traditional business to consumer format, because when we as consumers think about shopping, we either get in the car and drive to the store, or we get online and go buy something and it gets shipped to us. We're buying something from a business and it's coming to us, the consumer. So we call it business to consumer, and we think of that as the primary form of e-commerce. Here's the reality, though. That's just one aspect, and that's what this slide is about. A much bigger market segment than business to consumer is what we call the business to business market. So a lot of businesses shop this way too, right? And it's done in a number of different ways. So there's no like one way that they do it. But the business to business marketplace is significantly larger in the volume of monetary funds and goods being exchanged than the business to consumer market. So on a wholesale level or supply level or whatever, business to business is huge, and more businesses are going this way. So in the old days, for example, when I ran a business, I think back to like we would order supplies, silly stuff like, I don't know, paper towels or something goofy like that, or paper bags or something. And you'd either go to your supplier, or a salesman would come in, or you'd call the salesperson on the phone and go, "Hey Joe, I need 3 packs of paper bags and a carton of paper towels," or something like that. And they would write it up, and a truck would come later and deliver it. But a lot of businesses discovered it's like, well, hey, we're paying this full-time person to take an order. If we just had a website and they just click a couple of boxes and hit submit, it's the same difference, right? And so a lot of businesses have switched to that approach, and often to really, really big results, right? So like businesses that like held off on doing that for a long time and finally switched to it, discovered that online business to business sales can be humongous. And once again, way bigger than the business to consumer market. Another one is the consumer to consumer market, which is kind of weird because we don't really see a lot of this. But can anybody think of a consumer to consumer marketplace online? Does anybody think of an idea of like an example? Well, how about like eBay? Like if you go to eBay, I don't have to be a business to post stuff on eBay. In fact, I can just, like the car I bought online, for example, I could post it on eBay, put it either into an auction or a firm price, and somebody might buy it from me. I'm a consumer, I'm not a business or a car dealer, and I might sell it directly to another consumer. So that happens too. So, and there are entire consumer to consumer marketplaces that happen. So that's another thing. Another thing that's been going on too is the business to government, and truth be told, government to business as well. So, government needs supplies too, right? They have to order paper towels and cleaning supplies and whatever, office furniture, paper products, whatever you can think of that an organization needs to operate, can also order things electronically. What's also happened in the government sector, though, is the government now has opened itself up to the fact that like people can pay their taxes online, or their parking tickets online, or if you need permits or whatever, that kind of thing. So a lot of government entities are now offering ways to do, services typically online, and that's becoming a real growing field. When businesses do start to transmit information between themselves, and there are some formats. Now, I have a couple of students that I currently have. Actually, one is a web student, one's a data student that already work out in the field, and both of them work with this technology. It's called EDI, which is an electronic way for businesses to place orders that kind of skips, the phone calls and the fax machines of old. And we're doing things like, hey, my inventory system shows that I'm low on soda. And so when it drops below a certain threshold, let's say like 10 or 20% inventory, that system automatically puts in an order to our supplier electronically for a set amount of, like, order, 20 more cases of soda, for example. The transmission format of sending that information is called EDI, and there are people who make entire careers of programming that and working with EDI data transfers. This has become a really big thing. So if you can imagine, like, if you go to Walmart and they have like this giant pallet full of Pepsi, for example, and then their inventory system keeps a tab on that, and when it hits like, hey, we only have 10 cases of Pepsi left, it automatically puts in an order to Pepsi, and the next day the truck shows up with another pallet of soda, and no human being had to touch that ordering system. One inventory system talked to the ordering system, which talked to the shipping and delivery system, and it just shows up. So that's what EDI is, and really important, right? And you can make entire careers of working with that technology. What I do find really kind of interesting, I do want you to look at the data on this. This is 2015 sales figures. They didn't update this since, but I would think that we could probably go to the census website and look up more modern things. But back in 2015, so 7 years ago ish, right? What were people buying online? And I think these are really interesting figures. So these are commercial U.S. retail sales. So back 7, 8 years ago, people were sending $60 billion online on clothing that year, 33 billion on furniture and stuff, 30 billion on electronics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are not small sales figures, folks. You can imagine since then how much the sales have increased. I would be really curious, and maybe this is kind of a fun thing to do. I don't know. Okay, so this is actually a spreadsheet that shows this. All right, so I don't want to look at a spreadsheet. But I think that if I went to census.gov, went to retail releases, so they obviously keep track of this stuff. We could probably get a more modern update on these figures. My speculation would be that all of these figures probably grew incrementally by 10 to 20% a year per year. And then when we hit the pandemic, the stuff probably exploded, maybe even doubled or tripled, because all of a sudden nobody was shopping in the store. Everybody's shopping online. And you know what? A lot of people learned to shop online during the pandemic, and they're not going back. I don't know if you guys are like that. Like in the past, have you ever ordered groceries online? And most people would say no. Pandemic rolls along, people try it and they go, you know what? This is actually a lot better. All I have to do is pull up to the store and they put it in my car and I go. Or they just drop it off on my porch and I'm all set. I didn't have to spend the time, the gas, the money. I just sat at home and ate Cheetos the whole time. So that's a big thing. All right. Another really interesting chart here, and I think that this is, once again, a little bit subjective because it's dated information. But at the time when they first published this, so we have a 2019 published date, so I think those numbers are updated as of 2019. Okay, so it says for men, the percentage that use the internet, 89% of men. Okay, so now we have to think about this. Is this worldwide? No, this is not worldwide. This is United States, folks. This is what this data is based upon. So back in 2019, 89% of men used the internet. Okay, pretty high number. Just about everybody is using the internet. Women, 86%, slightly less, but really, really close to that. Now take a look at the age groups. 18 to 29, just about everybody is using it. Young adults, once again, just about everybody. Very few are not. Now you get into like my age group, right? And so like, I'm kind of anomalous in my age group because I'm a tech person, right? So I like fully absorb this stuff. And like, yeah, I'm all in, But in that age group, 87% are using technology. And I still do have friends to this day that I know who, okay, oh, yeah, they have a smartphone and they have a computer, but they're not really online all the time. Not like we are, right? We're doing email and social media and everything and shopping and everything. So as you kind of go up that age bracket, these percentages start to dwindle. So people over 65 say, hey, I got by my whole life without a computer. Why do I need one now? Is the attitude. Here's kind of interesting, though. I look at my wife's parents and my parents, and 20 years ago, my wife's parents, they were both still out in the field working, so they would kind of use computers at work. My mother-in-law more so than my father-in-law. Then I look at my parents, who always ran retail stores, and my mom never touched a computer, never wanted to touch one, never wanted to own a smartphone, any of that stuff. And then my dad, who's like, I don't need that stuff, but you know what? I'm willing to learn. So he kind of taught himself how to use a computer and get online. Then found out why it was cool. And now, 20 years later, my mom is now pushing 90, and now she is using a computer and a smartphone, like YouTubes and emails and all of it, right? And she never wanted to touch the stuff. So I think these numbers are going to change, right? I think what we'll find, though, in a country like ours, that, you almost cannot move forward without touching technology, right? I think that's kind of a given. I think it's interesting as well if you look at the rate of income, right? So like if your household income is less than $30,000 a year, you're less apt to be online. Makes sense, right? Because you can't afford the gadgets, you can't afford the computer, or you can't afford to have a phone. Here's a really kind of interesting statistic, though. Did you guys know that a lot of homeless people, they have nothing, but they have cell phones? And you know how they do that is because the government gives it to them, because they figure everybody needs to be able to be reached, somehow, or in an emergency, make a phone call. So there are programs for that. So that's how a lot of people are first getting online. But there is a correlation here. Higher the income level in a household, the more apt you are to be online. So once you get up to that, like, I look at like this wage level as kind of being family supporting wages. And then when you're in IT, folks, by the way, you should be able to reach a level like this, after being in the field for at least a few years, you should be able to reach, an income figure like that. Reality is for talented IT people, they can make significantly more than this. So those levels go up. You're only a high school grad, 80% likely to be online. College grad, well, come on, you can't even be in college without being on the computer. Just how it is. Even if you were studying like auto repair, you'd probably have to use a computer in college. So, but very interesting because it shows you that, generally speaking, people with more income and more education and younger tend to be online, right? So it's all those things kind of working together. There's a whole bunch of sites that do kind of follow these stats. You can kind of explore these on your own. I'm not going to follow any of these links here. All right, so when we do start to talk about e-commerce and we start to put things online, now we have a lot of issues to contend with that we don't otherwise contend with when we think about regular websites. So one thing is, if I'm selling a product, okay, so for example, I have a can of iced tea sitting here. This is a Arizona iced tea and lemonade half and half combo kind of thing, right? And I want to sell this product on my website. Well, I could take a picture of this can and just put it on the website, and there's a little Arizona logo on there. And even by the fact of me putting it into my recording, and I'm not sure if that's going to come out on the screen that's being recorded or not, probably not. I have some issues to think about, and intellectual property is one of them. I just took the image of somebody else's product, and now I'm selling it. Now you think the person that created it probably doesn't care, right? Because if you're selling their product, so they're going to make money. But it is also true that if you go to a website and somebody's taken the time to create branding or image or whatever, and then you're using it to sell a product that's not theirs, that's stealing. So a lot of intellectual property theft happens in e-commerce. So like if you create a product, take a picture of it and sell it on your website, and then somebody comes along, does a right click, save as, takes your image and says they're selling the same product, what are you going to do about it? Right? You're going to hire a lawyer probably. You're probably going to do a cease and desist, but still can have difficulties getting them to stop stealing your stuff, because it's really easy online to steal your content. Think about, what's happened to music, for example. In the old days, you had to buy a record album or a cassette tape or a CD, and yeah, you could like record those formats, and then later on you could digitally extract the information. But the musicians got to the point where they're not making any money off of record sales anymore. They're making it off of streams, and there's not a lot of money there. So the intellectual property becomes a really big issue. There's also issues with, how do you tax things? So like and this is really kind of an interesting thing. If I buy something online and I live in Wisconsin, but I buy it from a place in Chicago, I don't have to pay sales tax. Isn't that kind of interesting? But what you're supposed to do is whatever you buy from an out-of-state purchase, you're supposed to put it on your state income tax form and claim, hey, I bought $5,000 worth of stuff from out of state, so that your state can charge you the sales tax. Guess how many people volunteer that information? Like no one, right? So if you're buying something online from like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a place like Tiger Direct or something for computer stuff, and they're located in Ohio, and they don't have a presence in Wisconsin, they're not going to charge you sales tax. Well, that's 5%, right, that you're saving by doing that. So that's a big issue. When you buy from a big company like Amazon, because Amazon now basically has a presence in every state in the union, you're pretty much always paying sales tax on Amazon stuff. In the old days, when they didn't have a distribution facility in Wisconsin or any locations, you would say that too, right? So the big issue for state governments, right, that rely on that sales tax money for revenue, it is a really big thing. One thing that's also kind of weird is it's really hard, even though you would think we live in an international world, that's really easy to transact products internationally, and unfortunately that's not the case. It's actually pretty tightly controlled. Sometimes there are tariffs you have to pay if you're bringing things in from other countries, either coming in or going out. There's also the extreme cost of shipping, right? So like if I'm buying a $5 item from Amazon here in town, and they deliver it to me for free, okay, whatever, there's no shipping cost on it, great, I'm a Prime member. But if I buy it from Hong Kong and I get the thing for $1, same product, but now they got to ship it and it's going to cost $15 to ship. Well, what are you saving? You're not saving anything. And so international commerce can actually be quite difficult because of a lot of different barriers, but people do still do it, right? So you have to make it worthwhile. I would always be floored when I was running my business operations that I would sometimes sell like really bizarre things to really distant places. Like, for example, at one point I was selling Greek food products, and I got some customers in Australia, and I'm like, yeah, I can send you this cheese, but it's going to cost $200 in shipping. And they must have had the money or whatever. They're like, that's fine. I would never pay $200 to ship a piece of cheese, and have it sit out of the fridge for, 5 days or something, So there's a lot of barriers, right? A big thing that e-commerce does rely on, though, is this whole concept of basically encryption, and when we go to a website, that the lock in the browser is enabled. Like if it says not secure here, you don't want to put in that information. The way that we kind of transmit secure data over the internet is we take data that comes in plain text, We run it through what we call a hashing algorithm, which converts it into something that is unreadable. When it gets to the other end, they have an algorithm that deciphers it or whatever, and then decrypts it, and then you can see what the information is. So that's like how credit card transactions work. It is a complicated field of study, and I know that Vidal, for example, you are studying this as like your main degree path, right? So we talk about this on a very superficial level here. This is something that you can sort of kind of explore. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. We use some of these encryptions kind of intuitively and automatically and don't even think about it. As long as that lock is on the website, we're usually okay. That lock does imply that we have what we call SSL as our technology that's doing the encryption and decryption. And it's something that you can actually enable, on just about any web server. It's not really that hard to do. The key is that you have to buy a certificate that shows that you're real, right? So that's what, like when we were looking at the domain names earlier, and the fact that they came with SSL certificates, meaning you didn't have to pay extra for it, was really kind of a way of like whoever you're buying it from to certify that you're a real person, and then that lock can get turned on. You can run HTTPS without a lock on it, by the way, and it doesn't mean your data is insecure. It just means that the person who is running the website didn't want to pay for an SSL certificate. Doesn't mean that it's unsafe, though. But generally speaking, would I put my credit card number into a site where it says not secure? Not a chance. Not even, sometimes I'm reluctant even when it says it's secure. So these are kind of like more common sense things. They do go into this whole discussion here about how symmetric keys and asymmetric keys work, and I'm not really kind of worried too much about this. But long story short, basically there's two different kinds here. There's symmetric key encryption, where the encryption and the decryption use the same key. So you type in this one thing, it changes to something else, you get it on the other end, and it happens the same way. With what we call an asymmetric key, well, this gets a little bit more complicated because they use a different key, and really what they do is they have a public and a private key, right? So part of the key is made public and part of it is made private, so you can kind of transmit the data, but when the data comes back, it has to be re-encrypted using the private key. Whole field of study, by the way. Another real common thing that we see, especially on web servers, is what we call hash encryption. And this is very typical for like password databases are a great example. So for example, whenever I save like a password into my browser, that gets hashed into a database. In other words, whatever I type for the password gets converted into this gobbledygook that you can then later decrypt and figure out, but there's an algorithm that you use to do that, and that's called a hash algorithm or hash encryption. They kind of go into this whole thing about SSL and like how it works, but the long story short is SSL is active whenever you have an HTTPS address. So if the HTTP and there's an S there, that transmission is secured in transit, right? The lock is an indicator that the person paid for the certificate. The absence of a lock means they did not, right? There's also what we call self-signed certificates, which, if you're a server admin, you know what I'm talking about, where you can create your own certificate on your server. And for example, if you look at the Prometheus server, like if you type in, and it should be secure, right? So there it is, right? So we are secured, but we are securing ourselves, so we put the certificate in place ourselves, but it is, in place, and it does mean your stuff is transmitted. If we had not put the certificate in ourselves and installed it on the server, this would just read not secure and the lock would be open, even though it's HTTPS. Now, even though it's not secure, in principle, the transmission is still secure. It just means the person didn't pay for it. So I hope that resonates. And one of the reasons when you buy a domain name, why you do want to have an SSL certificate, so that can be a cost. So depending on where you get this from, some places will give it away for free. Some people will make you pay. So that's a pretty big thing. You can also kind of ramp it up to where you can actually buy digital certificates from independent third parties. Two of the real big ones are the ones listed here. There's others, by the way, but Racine and Thwart are the two big ones. And so the thinking on this one is that you buy the certificate from a third party, and the third party does extra due diligence to make sure that the people on both end are secure, so that all the data transmission is secure in place, and they have a third party place where you keep the certificate, so it's not self-signed. It's like, hey, check it out. Here's my passport. I made it myself. Versus, hey, I got it from this place that's official. And keeps track of them. And it's typically considered that better that if you get it from a third party. So if you look at like a website that's a real high level one, and you look at like who's securing it, this will tell you who's securing it. And if it's a third party like Racine, you perceive that it's safer. Is really what it is. Is it actually safer? Well, that's a separate topic of discussion, really. Generally, I would say it is. So when we're doing stuff online, we talk about all the security and stuff, and you know what? The big concern and the biggest barrier for people doing any transactions online is they're worried about their information getting stolen, or people, getting into their credit card or bank information. And so there's a bunch of different ways to process payments, right? And I don't know like how often you guys shop online and what your experiences are, but like the way that you proceed is pretty relevant to like the stuff you're doing. For the most part, most of us will use credit cards or debit cards, right? So we just pull out our card, read in the information, type it into the form and hit submit. Okay, so that's one way. Some places use what we call stored value cards. Okay, so this would be, for example, like if you go to any big retailer will do this these days. Like you go to Walmart, you can get a Walmart gift card, right? So they charge it up with their, money, and then you can go to any of their stores or online and use that card number to pull off of that value. So I would argue that like prepaid credit cards kind of fit into this area as well, but typically we think gift cards. Retailers love gift cards. You know why? Because a lot of times people will buy a gift card, and what happens with a gift card? You pay them up front, right? Here's $100, you get a $100 gift card. What happens if the card gets stolen, or the person that you gave it to never uses it? It's a win-win for the business, right? All they have to do is have a couple people lose them, and it's like, hey, that's money in our pocket. Too bad. Sorry. There are these other things too, and so we do have ways that we can do digital currency, and then of course we have all the cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and other methods. Does anybody here use like I'm trying to think, like Venmo, PayPal, the Cash app, any of those? Have you guys ever tried those?
Of course.
Yes. And I think those are pretty cool. And those kind of fit sort of into this category. It's not really what's happening. It's not technically digital cash, because usually you have to tie in either your credit, debit card, or bank account, right? But Vidalify, if you had a Venmo account and I have a Venmo account, all I need is your email address. I just go into the app, I'm sending Vidal some money, send. A few seconds later, you have it. You accept it, and it goes into your bank account or debit card or credit card. A lot more common these days. It's even gotten to the point where sometimes you go to some restaurants and instead of like paying with your credit card, you have the option to like send them Venmo or PayPal, and that's kind of a cool thing, I think, right? So kind of the modern way to do things. All right, let's talk about, how do people practically get into e-commerce. So like one thing that you can do is you can buy into a service. So here's a couple that they list right up here at the top. Shopify is by far one of the biggest. And so what a lot of companies do is they go to Shopify, it's just a website, and you can start an account and you can start selling stuff, and they set you up with a store, right? And all you have to do is like load up your images, type up your descriptions, put a price on it, and you got an e-commerce store up and running. A lot of places will have that kind of a service. Another thing that you can do is you can actually get a piece of software, and they say off the shelf, but really you would download this. And here's 3 shopping cart products that you can either add to a website, or the product itself becomes the website. Truly, these are sort of content management systems with e-commerce components built in. Some of these are completely free. So for example, OS Commerce and ZenCart are free pieces of software. You can set up a store free. You download your software, you install it, put your stuff in there, you got a store. When do you pay? When you try to process payments. So that's where they get you, because no credit card processing company will process credit cards for free. And I think that's kind of interesting. You have to pay a fee for that. And then, there's other aspects to it, but there are basically pieces of software you can download. Or what you can do is you can actually use custom services. So you can go to a provider that will actually custom build you an e-commerce website. That is something that I ventured into when I was a youth. I will never do it again. I learned how to code a shopping cart from scratch. It was nightmarish, real frankly, and I would never do it again. I would never, ever put in the effort. But back then, we didn't know better. It was like, well, I want e-commerce. How do I do that? Oh, I don't know. I guess I have to build it. And then later they came out with websites. We're like, oh, I can just buy this plugin for WordPress and there it is. Yeah, and that's kind of what people do now. So like when you go to your hosting to buy hosting, you will notice that some of the web hosts will have options for like, hey, look, there's an e-commerce store option for hosting. You just choose that, and then you just start dropping your products in. And you just pay a monthly fee, you pay for your credit card processing, and you're done. Right? And it's very popular. There are also a bunch of different services, right, where you can kind of buy plugins to add to your content management software or your website. So for example, if you work on WordPress, a really big e-commerce plugin is called WooCommerce, W-O-O Commerce. And it's just a plugin you add to the platform, and that gives you the ability to have a shopping cart. Once again, payment processing is a separate thing that you have to arrange on your own. In the old days, a lot of people, when they would get quick up and running e-commerce sites, a lot of times they would use PayPal for order processing. That's still available, by the way. And there's a bunch of different services that offer you scripts for running shopping carts on your website. And a lot of them are free, by the way. They just give you the code, you add it to your website, and then you set up an account with them. It grabs up the order and all that stuff. And usually the piece that's missing is the payment piece. PayPal is an exception, of course, and then that's how they make their money, right? So if you want to process the payment, then you pay them some money to do that. So there's a bunch of different ways to proceed with this, but it is a whole area of study. So like however deep you think web design is as a whole topic, e-commerce is equally as deep, maybe deeper, all on its own, right? Real common, by the way, like if you are a young web designer first going out into the field, that if you get into a paid position somewhere, especially at a big company, then it might be working on their e-commerce platform, like just entering products or adjusting prices or updating scripts, that kind of thing, because there's a lot of mechanical work that goes into it. One of my great examples is, when I was first doing this and doing e-commerce websites, the amount of time I took to like shoot product photos and write product descriptions and get all that posted and photoshopped and all the stuff you have to do. A lot of work, right? But at the same time, bread and butter work for web designers. It might be something you do all day long, right? Just like import images of products and upload them to a database. That might be your job. It doesn't sound very exciting, but hey, if it pays the bills, it pays the bills. All right, folks, that's going to end chapter 12.